Welcome everyone. Thanks for spending your evening with me. Okay, so this is what we're going to go over today. Interviews outside of a university setting. So we're going to go over what to expect at an interview, what not to do during an interview, what are some things to say during an interview, and what are some red flags that employers may possibly have about you since you come from a university setting either as a master's or a PhD level candidate. Cool? Cool. Okay. But first of all, some things about me. I'm Kristina. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I work at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, like Lydia said. I work with both undergraduate and graduate students that are a part of that college. And if I'm honest, grad students are my favorite, so yay, I'm so glad to be here with you guys. I also work as a career consultant here in the Madison area, so I meet with folks, the whole gamut of the experience, like from high school students all the way to retirees about career development. So kind of have a unique perspective here on campus. So that's me. Now something that I'm assuming about you guys, I'm assuming that you're all master's or PhD levels folks. Who here is graduating with their master's? A few. Who here are, well, the rest of you are PhD folks, I'm assuming. Yeah, okay, cool. So I am speaking, this presentation is tailored towards folks that are getting out of academia. They do not want to interview for jobs as tenured faculty or researchers at a university. They want to get outside of a university setting, just so we're all on the same page about who this presentation is for. Okay? Okay. So with that being said, that's going to make this a pretty broad talk because there's a lot of different positions that you can go into outside of an academic setting. So if you know specifically what kind of job you want to interview for, make sure to find someone who's in that field who can tell you what are the specific parts of those interview settings. Because typically certain jobs have different kind of interviews. I'm going to go over a really broad understanding of what an outside of university interview will look like. Okay? Okay. So first of all, what to expect generally from an interview outside of the university. But first let's talk about what interview at a university tends to look like. So university interviews tend to be like 1 to 2 days. You got 12-hour days where you're doing dinners, socializing things, interviews with groups, with individuals. It's just a whole mishmash of a long, tiring couple of days. Thankfully, industry interviews tend to be a little bit different. They tend to be a lot more varied. There's a lot of different kinds of industry interviews that are out there. So it's good to be prepared. But generally speaking, industry interviews last about 40 minutes. And they can include job talks, one-on-one interviews, panels, a dinner, maybe even personality assessments or case studies that you do as part of the interview process. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So there's a lot of different stuff that can be covered in that 40-minute period. So the best thing to do when you get asked to have an interview is to, as quickly as you can, get the agenda of the interview so you know what the interview will consist of. So you know if there's going to be a job talk, if you know there's going to be a group interview, if you know you're going to be asked to go out to dinner. Okay? So first and foremost, when you get that interview call, yay, what's the agenda look like as soon as you get that call? Okay? All right. So let's cover what are the absolute things that you should not do for an interview in industry. Okay? Number 1, do not wait to ask questions as soon as possible. So when they ask you for that interview, do a little celebratory dance in your chair, get the agenda, and then ask what is the proper dress code for your organization. Because sometimes you have no idea. Is it professional dress? Is it business casual? We don't know. So ask them and see what's proper to wear. Totally cool. It seems a little weird, but everyone asks it. It's never good to show up to an interview when you're more casual than the person who's interviewing you. If they're like, oh, whatever you want, always dress professional if you can. Unless you absolutely know the corporate culture and everyone's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, so professional for them would be like khakis. Okay? But know the dress code. If you are giving a presentation as a part of your agenda, Ask them what kind of format you have available for your presentation. Are you giving a poster presentation? Will you be doing a group discussion with your peers or with people in different parts of the hierarchy of the organization? Or will you be giving a PowerPoint presentation? So make sure you know if you need any technology, if you need to create a big old poster, anything like that. So ask questions. Now, I talk with a lot of graduate students that are interviewing for out in the industry, and one of the questions they ask, so they told me to do like a job talk? What does that mean? So really, when you're asked for a job talk at an industry interview, they want to amuse-bouche, like a small little tidbit of what your research is here on campus. They don't need to know, as a PhD or master's level person, you know really in depth about your subject level, right? About your subject area. You've done the research, you've done the readings, you have an advisor in that, you know in depth. They don't care as much about that. They want to know more, are you the kind of person that I can get along with? Are you the kind of person that'll work together well in a team? Do you present your ideas clearly? What are your thought processes? So they want to know a little bit about your research, but also about how you did your research. Any questions about that? No? Cool. Okay, so that's what not to do. Do not wing it either. Don't go in there just thinking you can do it because, you know what, I know this study and I'm going to go do it. I know the research, so I'm going to do it. Unfortunately, no, don't do that. You probably all know this already. So it's time to get your computers out and do some research. Make sure that you understand about the position and the organization. So the first thing to research when you have an industry interview is understand the organization, what their values are. Organizations spend a lot of time figuring out what their values are, and a lot of time they have value, well, most of the time they have value statements. So here's just a couple from Covance, Starbucks, and P&G. This is how they're telling you who they are as an organization. So at least it's a good idea to have a cursory idea of what their values are. And you can find it right on their webpage. Then organizations also spend a heck of a lot of time figuring out what their mission statement is. And that's where they're talking about what it is that they actually do. So again, you can look on their website and just find out what it is that they do. So Covance brings new and innovative medicine to patients sooner. P&G's got a long one. Okay, so those two things. Also research what is the hierarchical ladder of the organization and where you might fit in with that. Are there a lot of people that are under you? Are you at the bottom of the totem pole? Who will you be reporting to possibly? Sometimes you can find this information on the website, but sometimes it's not there. So that's where having connections with folks that are in that corporation or organization can be really helpful. But Kristina, I don't know anybody in that organization. Well, good thing you asked. We have a wonderful thing called LinkedIn. Is everyone a part of LinkedIn? Yes, no, maybe so. So LinkedIn is a great place to get connections with employees that are in a current organization. So most major organizations will have a LinkedIn page. So as a LinkedIn member, you can contact someone from that organization and ask them, so what's the hierarchical organization look like for your company? Another way to go a little bit step over that, we have something at UW called the Badger Bridge. Anybody know about that organization? Yes and no? Badger Bridge is part of the Wisconsin Alumni Association. So what they have done is the Alumni Association has contacted alumni that work at all over the United States and the world and ask them if they're willing to talk to current students about their job. So you can go into Badger Bridge and you can type in, let's say you're applying to Covance, and you can type Covance into their directory, and you can get a listing of all the former alumni who work at Covance who say that they're willing to help current students. So that's a great way to say, hi, I noticed that you work at Covance. I'm a student who's interviewing there. I wonder if you could just tell me the hierarchical structure about the organization. What's cool about that, it's a pre-approved list of people that are totally willing to help. And it's just Badger Bridge, which is pretty cool. Okay, So the hierarchical, that's really hard to say, you see it. And then the core competencies of the organization, which is basically a fancy way of saying who are their competitors? What makes them different from other people that are in the field? So you don't need to know like the price forecasting for their competitors or anything like that. Just know that there's these other organizations that do similar things that is their competitors of the company that you're applying for. Okay? And then reread the job posting. This is probably the biggest thing to research before you go on your interview. Because I know a lot of times when you're in the season of looking for positions, you tend to apply for a lot of different things. So sometimes you can lose track of all the different job postings. Make sure to keep track of the job postings so you can go back and read them when you're about to go on an interview for a job. Okay? Okay. It's also a good idea to research the people who are interviewing you. So it's completely appropriate when someone is asking you to come for an interview for you to say, who are the people that are interviewing me? So then you can do a little internet stalking. It's not stalking, but looking on Google, looking on LinkedIn, looking on Twitter, and seeing what these people post. Maybe research that they're a part of. Maybe they wrote an article. But just do a little bit of digging to find out who these people are. Okay? Cool. All right. Some other things not to do. Do not be insecure at the interview. So the reason I say this is because a lot of times folks that are in their master's program or their PhD program have been taught a typical way of talking, like an academic way of talking. Right? So things like, it could be thought that, we found data that might, the results suggested that we could possibly, academic talk like this is not going to go over well in an interview setting. Okay? So in an interview setting, they're looking for action and results, especially out in industry. So for example, things like, it could be thought that, I am confident that, yada, yada, yada. We found data that might. 1 month after completing the data and drawing conclusions, I streamlined the process, yada, 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 talking about the results. The results suggested that, I think a great starter project. So actions and results. Okay? And we're going to go a little bit more in depth about what it is to say. But that typical academic talk that I know a lot of folks tend to learn to use when talking about research is just not going to fly in an interview setting, in industry. Okay. So what actually do you say? When you're in the hot seat, you've arrived, and oh my gosh, they're going to ask me questions. So I have a master's degree. I do not have a PhD. So I thought it would be useful to find someone who has a PhD who went through this process and kind of give her your advice. So here we have, that's a crazy picture, but Dr. Shiba Argawal-Jans, and she recently went through an interview, and this is what she had to say, okay?
So an interview is obviously the most important part of getting a job, simply because of the fact that the interviewer will be able to assess you as a person and see if you can fit into his team. Okay, so a lot of times, you will come in and people will not be assessing you on what you can do and what you have, or what kind of skills you've got even, but also just your personality type. And it's very important to know for them to know that you can work together with the whole team or with them. Things that I found really, really helpful, and this is something which is probably a recurring theme in people who want to leave academia and go into industry, is that interviewers usually have questions for you. They ask you questions like, give me a situation where you have done a certain thing. For example, give me a situation where you have negotiated with somebody. Give me one of the questions that I was asked was, tell me about a time when you started a project and took it to the finish line. So how did you do that? What kind of strategy did you take, for that? So these kind of things, because they're not people who are in industry are not interested in what you've done in the lab, so they don't want to know about the subject that you've done, but they want to know how you have actually presented yourself in order to achieve a certain goal. And that is more important. So, and also, of course, these kind of stories doesn't only have to be from your lab life or from your academic life. It can also be from your personal life. For example, one of the things that I was asked also was that give me an example of how you multitasked. So you can have an example of, well, I was doing a project in the lab, and this is happening at home, and perhaps so I basically managed all of that at once. So stuff like that. So this is a very standard type of question that interviewers ask, especially when you're coming in from a different discipline, for example, because they just want to know if you're capable of handling yourself in the situations that you might find yourself in if you're in the job.
Okay. So basically what she's saying is that out in industry, folks tend to really like asking behavioral questions. And who here has heard of a behavioral question before? Some people? So a behavior question is, tell me a time when. Give me an example of when you blah, blah. Things like that, where they're really looking for the answer in a story form, pretty much. Excuse me. So just a little background on what Dr. Sheba did. She was a molecular genetics PhD. She got her PhD in molecular genetics, and now she works as a publisher, a life science publisher, and helps people publish things, which is kind of cool. So she made the jump from academia to industry. Okay, so behavioral questions. How do you go about answering them? STAR method, one of those lovely acronyms that we have. It's a wonderful way to formulate your answers when asked a behavioral question. So, STAR method. So when you're answering a question, for example, like, tell me a time when you were on a team, or tell me a time you had a conflict situation with a coworker, things like that. They're looking for 4 separate pieces of information. The situation, kind of setting the scene, the task, describing what was the thing that needed to be accomplished, the action, how you accomplished that, and the results. What happened afterwards, okay? So we're gonna try doing the STAR method together. Cool? There is a position description right here on the back behind the STAR method. This was posted last week at AbbVie. It's actually here in Madison, if anybody's interested, for a medical science liaison in gastroenterology. So when employers give you a position description, they're basically telling you what they want to hear in an interview setting. I know that sounds kind of weird. But when you read a position description, they tell you what are the skills and abilities that they're looking for. Okay? So you can go ahead and read it if you want to. I'll give you a minute to read this and kind of think about, or if any skills or abilities come up, maybe give them a circle or an underline. Okay, so when you get a position description for an interview that you have scheduled, and you're looking through it, before we say that, first of all, I want to say a lot of people tend, when they get an interview, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to know how to answer all the questions because go into freak out mode and tend to Google interview questions. And then you get lists and lists of thousands of questions. And you can definitely do that and spend a lot of time formulating answers for all of those questions. But this way is going to make it a lot more time saving and more bang for your time buck, because these are the skills and abilities that they're wanting to know about. So if you prepare stories for all of these skills and abilities, you'll make sure to talk about them during the interview, kind of no matter what questions they talk about, because they're mostly going to be behavioral-based questions. Okay? Okay. So when you're looking through your position description, we all circled skills and abilities or underlined them. What I want you to do, and this, you don't have to do it now, but when you're preparing for an interview, make a little chart, a chart that has skills on one side and then stories or examples on the other side. So what I always tell folks to do is, on the skill side, pick the skills on here that you think you're like really awesome at, or that you think are really important for the job from the position description. Put them on your table, and then think of some examples of when you utilize those skills. These are just random ones that I came up with that possibly could. But they really want to know actions and results, right? So if you can give them an action and result for the skills that they're looking for, you are going to be golden for the interview. Okay? And when you're coming up with these stories and examples, you want to make sure that you can answer them using the STAR method. So being able to showcase what the situation is, what the task is that you did, the actions that you took, and then the results that you got because of your actions. Okay? So we're actually going to practice, I'm sorry. So find someone to practice with, and we are going to try using the STAR method together. Okay? So I'm going to let you each practice the STAR method. You have the STAR method listed right here, and I'm going to give you a question. Okay? So why don't you find someone, and then once you found someone, look at me, and I'll tell you what your question is, okay? Okay. You're each going to have 2 minutes, and the question that I want you to ask is, or answer using the STAR method, tell me about a time you worked on a team. I apologize to all the introverts in the room. Okay, 2 minutes, and then I'll say next person, and then the next person can go. Okay? On your mark. Get set. STAR method. All right. What's something your partner did that was awesome? That you thought was really great, the way they answered the question?
My partner was calm the whole time.
Yeah? Awesome. That's hard to do. What else did people do well? Do we need a lot of work? Go for it.
I like that he recognized his weaknesses and said them, but then explained how he worked to make them.
Awesome. We're going to talk about that later too. That whole weakness question. Anything else that people did really well? These are really hard questions, like behavioral questions. They're probably like the least liked question that exists on the planet, especially in an interview setting. So it's really important to think about practicing your questions, your answers to all the skills and abilities, your stories. So there's research that's been made, of course there's research, about the optimal amount of time that an interview question should be answered in. It's between a minute and a half. So if it's below a minute, people are like, wow, she has nothing to say. And if it's above a minute and a half, people's eyes start glossing over. So it's a great idea to practice your STAR stories for your examples and time yourself to see if you are within that minute to a minute and a half. So I gave you 2 minutes between folks. So if you were within there, nice job. But if you were a little less than that, maybe you can add some more detail. Okay? So just make sure to practice, 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 practice. Okay? Cool. So other than behavioral kinds of questions, there are 5 really, really, really popular questions that employers love asking. So every year we have a career fair. Well, every semester we have a career fair. You may have seen signs around for the career fair. That was a couple of weeks ago. And for the fall career fair, typically we have an employer panel that comes. And the career services folks around campus go and say, hey, so what are the questions you like to ask? What are the qualities you're looking for? Just to make sure that we're all up to date with our knowledge. And it tends that these are the 5 questions that we hear back year after year after year of employers saying that they just love asking people, including some behavioral questions. So we're going to go over them together. Cool? Okay. So the first one, tell me about yourself. Oh. This one's awful, because what are you supposed to say? Tell me about yourself. Okay, so when employers are asking you to tell me about yourself, they don't want to know that you love cats and knitting and like Formula One racing. They want to know why you are in that seat at this time. So why did you apply for the job? Why are you a good fit for the job? And just a little slice about yourself. So if I was going to answer a tell me about yourself question, I'd say, hi, my name is Kristina Vack. I have a lot of interests in historical sewing. And also, I really think that I'd be a great fit for this position because I've worked with students for the past 10 years. I've really learned how to navigate relationships with both undergrads and graduate students, as well as my coworkers, which I notice is a really important part of this position from the position description. So something like that. So that's where you can throw in one of those skills or examples, skills and abilities that they have posted on the position description. Just get it right out the bat. Okay? And again, that wasn't between a minute and a half, so it'd have to go a little bit more than that. But you can also say I got my education at Princeton and then here at UW-Madison. I don't know, wherever you got it. Just brief, and then while you're in that chair at that moment. Okay? You guys don't ask many questions. If you have questions for me, please feel free to ask. This is a give and take. Okay?
Is it appropriate to repeat things that are on your
resume?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it word for word because that'd be weird. Because they're going to have a copy of your resume. But you can totally, because that's your bread and butter, right? Those are your skills. Those are your experiences that you've had. So definitely talk about the things that are on your resume, for sure. Yeah.
How much personal information do you think they want to know?
Not very much. Not very much. Unless you have a personal connection with someone at that organization. So let's say your Aunt Maud works wherever this place is. You know, my Aunt Maud works in, and she says this is a fantastic workplace because yada, yada, yada. You donate 10% of your proceeds to this charity that I really believe in, or something like that. So they just want to know little tiny tidbits that you think are interesting. This is also where doing research about your interviewers can be very helpful. Because maybe you found out that one of the interviewers on their Twitter feed is like a super fan of downhill skiing, and so are you. So you can mention that as you're telling me about yourself, if it's convenient like that. What other questions? All right, let's go on. What do you consider to be your greatest strengths and weaknesses? This is also a toughie. Okay, so when you're talking about your strengths, they have told you what they want your strengths to be. So guess what? Those are the strengths that you're going to talk about. So pick 2 or 3 of the skills and abilities that you practiced using the STAR method that you learned from the position description. And those just happen to be your best skills and abilities. So give an example of when you did those things. It shows that you did your research and read the position description and that you really want to work there. Okay, now weaknesses. This is I think weaknesses are one of the hardest questions. Because no one likes talking about their weaknesses, especially in an interview where you really want to get a job, right? Okay, so kind of the rule of thumb for weaknesses is do not choose something that is integral to the job. Doy. So if it's a job where you're communicating with people, don't say you're a bad communicator. So A, 1. B, choose something that is actually a genuine weakness. A lot of people fall into the trap of saying, well, one of my weaknesses is that I'm a perfectionist. Do not say that. Employers hate it. Every year they say, we hate it when people say that they're a perfectionist because it's kind of like a non-weakness. I actually had a student that I met with who went on an interview recently, and she said that her weakness was perfectionism. And the recruiter was like, yeah, okay, what else? And she was like deer in headlights because she didn't have anything prepared. Okay, so weakness, don't do weakness. Don't do perfectionism, excuse me. We all do weakness. Second of all, don't do something that's integral to the job. And third of all, choose something that is actually a genuine weakness. Something that can be easy to do for a weakness question is let's go back to the position description. And maybe there is, I don't know, I'm looking at the medical science one here. I looked at the position is to meet healthcare industry representative credentialing requirements to gain entry in facilities. Maybe you don't have those credentialing requirements yet. Or maybe there's a certain part, like computer program that they use that you don't know. Or maybe there's a specific technique that you're just not that sure about. That can be a weakness. So you can say, you know, a weakness that I have is I don't know about the credentialing requirements. I have a little bit of an idea. I talked to some people about it. But I do know that I'm very forthcoming and I'm a go-getter, and I will make sure to go get those requirements as soon as the first day that I'm setting floor in your organization. So you can say something like that, but also always make sure, kind of like what you were saying, to talk about the ways that you can overcome that weakness. So say a weakness and then how you are able to overcome it. So doing something technical is really easy, but let's say you're like bomb and you know everything on this sucker. You're just like super ready and they still ask you the weakness question. Then it's okay to say something that is truly a weakness of yours, but not something that's a deal breaker. So maybe sometimes, I don't know, maybe dealing with deadlines, and that's not integral to the position, but maybe dealing with deadlines is something that's sometimes hard for you. So saying, you know, a weakness that I have is sometimes I tend to lose track of my deadlines. I always meet my deadlines, but I end up really pushing really hard at the end to try to get to my deadline. And I know that's a weakness because I get really flustered. So what I've been tending to do is on my Google Outlook calendar, I've been setting myself mini deadlines, like 2 days ahead of time, 5 days ahead of time, a week ahead of time, to make sure that I'm staying on track. So saying something like that. So just make sure that you are following up with the ways that you are making that weakness a non-weakness. Any questions about the weakness question? It's really hard. Cool. Okay. What are your short-term and long-term goals? I love this one. Usually short-term goals, I'd like to work at this organization. That's a great short-term goal. And then maybe why that organization or where you see yourself maybe moving in that organization is a short-term goal. The long-term goal, they're wanting to know about 5 years out, typically speaking. So this is where you can either be brutally honest or not as brutally honest. So let's say eventually this is just like a stepping stone position and you're like, you know, I just want to get out in the industry and then I really want to do this, but I think this would be a good stepping stone. You can either be brutally honest with them about it because maybe it's a really huge organization. Let's say that you eventually want to get into graphic design, but your main focus is in publishing or something like that. So you can say, I'm really interested in getting into this publishing role. Maybe you're an English PhD or something. Getting into this publishing role. Eventually, I'd really like to get in graphic design. I noticed that your organization has a lot of folks that move within the hierarchical ladder, so people can go to different divisions, and that's something that really drew me to you guys, and I'm excited about the possibility of doing that in the future. So you can say something like that. But let's say maybe in 10 years, you just want to go back to, maybe you're a master's student, and maybe in 5 years, you see yourself going to get a PhD. You could tell them about that, but you know what? 5 years is a long time, and plans change. You never know what's going to happen in 5 years. So I usually say it's best to be a little less brutally honest and more like kind of honest. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. But then you also do some soul searching yourself, like what are your plans for 5 years from now? Which sometimes can be really, really daunting, right? Especially if you're like, oh man, being tenure faculty is just not going to work out for me. Oh crap, you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. Then we have the behavioral question. This one they love. Tell me a time you dealt with a challenging person. Sometimes they ask a challenging coworker. Sometimes they ask a challenging supervisor, which is always fun, talking about a time you had a bad thing with a boss. Especially, you know, sometimes advisor relationships can be really fraught with some tension in the academic setting, depending on who you're with. So you kind of have to tread on soft ground there. So a time with a challenging person, they don't want to know all the ins and outs about your fight. They don't really care. Or about the situation that you were in. They want to know how you were able to work through that situation and come to a result. So they want to know what your thought process was in terms of dealing with someone who's challenging and how you went about doing it. And if the result was good, great. If it wasn't, that's fine too. They just want to know how you deal with it. There's a lot of research out there that shows that people that are more reflective about their experience are easier to manage. So by asking these kinds of questions, they're gauging whether or not you'll be someone who's easier to manage as an employee. So they're pretty much, has anyone been asked this question before? Interviews, I see a lot of heads. Yeah, they love this sucker. So they just mostly want to know the process. Let's say if they ask you about the supervisor, and let's say it's with your advisor and that person is like really well known in the field, and they are known in the company that you're applying for, and you're like, ugh. Think of someone else if you can in that situation. Or you can also be like, I've been really lucky and I haven't had that many challenging experiences with my supervisor, but I have had a challenging situation with a colleague of mine. And this is how it went. And then at the end say, and if I were to have a challenging experience with a supervisor, I would handle it in the same method as I would with a colleague. So just kind of throwing it around that way. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. Okay. Yes.
Question. I'm kind of assuming the answer, but
Sure.
So in a question like this, and kind of going back to the question that you gave us earlier about working in a team.
Yes.
Presumably they don't want to hear about your like challenging relationship with your sister or
So let's say you
like
have
a sports team or something like that. They would want something that's more contextualized in like a work situation.
Sure.
Is that a good assumption?
That is a good assumption, but let's say you're awesome and you don't have any experiences having conflict in a work setting. Then it's totally fine to talk about, well, I had this roommate and we had a conflict situation and this is how I handled it. Or you can say, I've been blessed in that I haven't had that many conflict situations in the workplace. However, I have had one with a roommate and this is how I solved it, blah, blah, blah. And if I was to have a conflict situation with a colleague or with a supervisor, I would handle it in the same manner. So you can throw it in that way. But it also might throw up some red flags because there's conflict in every workplace, right? So they'd be like, why does she have conflict in her workplace? So I'd probably stick with the workplace one if you can, but if not, then a different kind of conflict, totally cool. Yeah.
So obviously, I'm not going to share the name of the person,
Sure.
challenging person or anything, but would that be appropriate to share some details of the organization, name of the organization?
Yeah, well, as long as they're not a close working partner with the organization that you're applying to work with. So, I mean, you can name drop if you want to. I probably wouldn't. But you always want to talk positively as much as you can about the person with which you had the conflict situation. Because no one likes someone who drags someone under the bus. You know what I mean? So you can say a couple of things about the organization just for contextualization, but just make sure that it's positive-ish. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what do you think about a challenging person that is your supervisor? Like, is it, I'm trying to frame this question.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to have had the conversation with your supervisor where you're like, this was a challenging situation with your supervisor, or would they appreciate that you were like, well, I dealt with my supervisor in his challenging ways or something like that?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So is it, this is how I deal with a challenging person, or this is how I resolved a conflict with a person? The difference between those two? No, okay.
It's like, is it better to ignore the challenges from your supervisor?
Oh. And talk about it in an interview? Well, I don't know. I mean, does it work for you? Yeah, and I think if you're able to talk about the reasons why it works for you and why it helps you be a more productive employee, yeah, sure, definitely. Because we all know people that are just those people. You know what I mean? That are just really challenging to work with. Yeah, no, I think as long as you're able to talk about it and talk about how you're able to constructively deal with it, yeah, I think it's cool. Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. Anyone else? All right. Yeah, please.
Is there an ideal answer or an ideal way of answering this kind of?
An ideal? No. I mean, the ideal way to answer the question is really letting the employer know how you processed dealing with the conflict. Because the conflict is kind of ancillary. Like, it's not the big part of the question. What they really want to know is how you were able to deal with an interpersonal situation. Because we all want to work with people that are good at communicating with us. And so that's the most important part, is I would spend the majority of your time talking about how you dealt with it. Less about the actual conflict. Anyone else? All right. And then the why do you want this job? This is hard just because there's so many different reasons that people want jobs. And especially for folks that are coming out of academia thinking that they were going to be tenured faculty eventually and become an academic, and decided for either the job outlook or just for personal reasons that that's just not for them anymore, sometimes that can be really challenging in understanding why you've changed your path and that kind of thing. So this is definitely something to prepare for. Really thinking about why either this company, why this position, and why you decided to get out of academia. If you are a PhD, that generally those folks tend to go to tenured positions. And we'll talk a little bit about that later too. Yeah.
So do you have to specifically mention why you're leaving academia? Because I thought nowadays, like, the smaller population of PhD students stay.
I would agree with you, but there's not that perception out in industry. So a lot of industry folks sometimes are like, well, why aren't you doing a PhD? Like, why aren't you going for tenured faculty? Or why aren't you being a researcher at an institution? So there is that bias that's out there. So it's good to have an answer for it. What other questions? Cool. Okay. Now, also remember that interviewing is a two-way street. So they'll be asking you questions, but then they're expecting for you to ask them questions. I'm sorry, it's so funny. All the slides are black, and then this one has a lot of like light, and so you guys are all like, ah, to me now. It's really funny. Okay, so make sure that you have questions for them. I always recommend that folks have, I don't know, like 7 to 10 questions available for an interviewer. Sometimes when you go on an interview, the person who's interviewing you is actually not that great of an interviewer and will just yapper on for like 20 minutes all about the position and ends up asking like all your questions. So make sure to at least have 1 or 2 questions at the end that you can talk to an employer, ask an employer. So 7 to 10 is usually a good rule. There's some examples on the back of some questions, but what does success look like for the position? What are the qualities of person who excels in the role? How would you personally describe company culture? What are some of the challenges? And this is kind of, if you're feeling like you're having a good rapport with the interviewer, asking them if they have any hesitations about you. It takes a certain person to ask that question, but it's definitely legit to ask. Something else that I kind of love about asking, what are the qualities of the person who excels in this role? If they tend to mention some of the things that you talked about, like while you're doing the behavioral questions, like the skills and abilities, then you know like you're kicking butt at that interview. So it's a nice way to gauge how well you're doing as well. You can also Google questions for interviewers and get thousands of lists of questions. So if you're running out of ideas, just Google it and pick like a few of them to add on the list as well, just in case you have an interviewer that talks a bunch and answers a lot of your questions. Okay? Yes, and then I'll be right with you. Go ahead.
So when you ask what the questions, they're like, what are the qualities of the person who fills in this role, or do you have any hesitations about me? Mm-hmm. And they are things that you're like, oh my gosh, that's true, I'm going to be more bold.
Like, yikes.
Yeah. Like,
yeah. So is it more like, oh man, I just realized I'm not going to be good at this job? Or, oh shoot, you brought that up and I didn't really want to talk about it. What was that? Is it more the first or the second? Both? Yeah, okay. So let's say what are the hesitations you have about my qualifications? It's a good way for you to kind of bring up anything and for you to be able to talk about it. So if they bring up, we just noticed you just don't have a lot of experience in industry and it's all in a university setting, and we're really worried that you're not going to transition well. So for you, that's a good way for you to say, or it's not good, but you can talk about then ways that you have transitioned in the past. So an example of, I took a gap year off between my undergrad and my master's degree or my PhD studies. And I spent a year, being a barista and doing some research on the side as a volunteer at a university. And then I had to transition from working for a year to the university setting again. And yada, 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 these are the things that I did to facilitate that transition. And so I would do it the same this time. So it's a good idea. I mean, you might get that like headlight in the face, oh gosh, I didn't like think about this. But it is a way for you to kind of smooth over any red flags that they have about you. But let's say they say that and you're like, oh, you're right. I'm not very good at this. Like, I'd actually really hate this. You can say, yeah, those are interesting questions. I'll have to think about it. Or yeah, those are some hesitations. Thanks for bringing that up. You can even say that and then like, don't answer their call when they offer you the position. You know what I mean? So there's lots of different ways to talk about it. Another good, I'll be right with you too, okay? Oh yeah, awesome. So let's say someone asks you a question and you get that deer in the headlights like, oh crap, I did not plan for this. Or they ask like, what's your favorite fruit and how does it describe you? Like some ridiculous question like that, which sometimes they ask. So if they ask you a question that you have no idea what to say, a really good strategy for that is say, wow, that is a really interesting question. I'm just gonna need a couple of moments. And while you say that, your subconscious is like, shit, 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 and then comes up with an answer. So if you say, that's a really great question, I'm just gonna need a couple of moments. And then you can verbal dump whatever it is that came in your brain at that moment. But give yourself a little bit of time. Yeah, go for it.
On that note, it's okay to vamp, just be like speaking your thoughts out loud.
It could, but sometimes I know some people that do that and then they say things that they really regret. So you can just like, oh, well, fruit, I love fruit. Or maybe you could sound just silly. So it's a better thing just to ground yourself a little bit and say, that's a really interesting question. I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit. And then go into it. Because they're gonna know by asking you a question like that, that they're gonna be stumping you. Or let's say there's even a question like a behavioral one that totally catches you off guard. And so you need some time. Yeah.
How bad is it if you're like total deer in the headlights and you just say like, I really want to think about this. Can I email you a response later?
You can, but what does that say that about you? Yeah, and if that's an integral part of the position, are they going to want you then? So if it's an integral part of the position, then I'd say, you know, this may sound a little bit silly, but just from thinking on my feet, and then you can just say something randomly. So I guess it depends on the position. Anything else? I've definitely been in that position before. I was once asked in an interview, what kind of underwear are you and why? Underwear! I did not accept that position. I don't want to work for an organization that talks about underwear. All right.
So if they ask a question like that,
Yeah.
could you tell them like that's inappropriate?
You can if you want to, but it means you probably wouldn't get a job because that's a part of the corporate culture. So if you're like, no, I mean, it says something about the culture, right? Because an interview is about you interviewing them as well as them interviewing you. So if you're like, underwear question, like me, then you know that's not a great place to work. Any other questions? It's a really good question. It was for a tour guide position. I actually took three gap years, if that is a gap year. 3 years between my undergrad and my graduate degree, and I was working as a tour guide for a winery. And they asked me that. And I said, no. They had a different corporate culture. All right, can we move on? Cool. Okay, so what are some red flags that folks typically have about, that employers have about PhD and master's level folks that are transitioning, getting out of academia? So we talked about this a little bit before with some questions. So some ideas that why aren't you applying for academic jobs? So they may ask you that, or they may just be thinking about it. So this is where it's really important for you to create a story for them. Give them a story arc about what your decision-making process was like for getting out of the academic track. And if you haven't thought about that yet, about what that means for you, now's a really good time to think about that. Why it is that you decided to get out of academia. And make sure it's a positive spin. Okay? And that's going to be different for everybody. So some folks are worried that you won't be able to communicate with folks that are not academic, that don't have a high level of education as well. So a really great way to kind of confront this stereotype and bias is by showing really great nonverbal behavior. There's actually, has anyone heard of Joe Navarro? He wrote this book called Body Language. He's an ex-FBI officer, agent, whatever you call him. But he spent his lifetime doing research and working with people about nonverbal communication. And he came up with this wonderful backed research about what is the most collegial and likable body language that's out there. It's really interesting. And this is what it is. It's having a head tilt, having happy eyes, so like the squinchy bits in your eyes, crow's feet, I guess you call them, and then having a good handshake. And a good handshake, it's a very specific kind of handshake. A good handshake is where you want this part of your hand to touch the other person's thing. So like that. That is a good handshake. I don't know what it's called, but when you're touching, you want to make sure that those two parts of your hands touch. This is Joe Navarro, this is not me. So a really collegial, also having open body language, so not sitting like this, but having open body posture. Having your hands in your lap, that kind of thing. Also, when you're on an industry interview, your interview starts the moment you get out of your car or get off the bus or you're walking towards the organization. Because they tend to ask people from all levels of the organization. So maybe the secretary that you worked with, maybe they have an intern that got you coffee, or all these different kinds of things. So make sure to be kind to everyone, because sometimes if you are the same standing with another individual, they'll bring in the person who checked you in at the front desk and say, who was nicer to you? It's been known to happen. So use open nonverbal communication and be nice to everybody as soon as you get there. Okay? Okay. Another stereotype some folks have, or they just are wondering how getting an advanced degree actually prepared you for the job that you're applying for. So let's say you're kind of transitioning into a job that is not research-based. Maybe you're kind of doing a tilt that way. And so they want to know how getting that PhD is really going to help you in the job. They already have a good idea of how it might, because you're in the interview chair. They know what you can do. They've seen your resume. They've read your cover letter. But still, they kind of want to know. So this is where you really got to focus on the transferable skills that you gained doing your work here at the University of Wisconsin. So these are some skills that a lot of folks, both in master's and PhD level, tend to gain while here at the UW. So focusing on the skills. Skills are transferable, tasks are not. I'm just going to say that again. Skills are transferable and tasks generally are not. So focus on the skills related to the task that you did. And again, those skills will probably be found in the position description. Okay? Okay. So some really important things. So let's say you did the interview, you did your STAR method answers, you got your weakness question, you nailed it. They asked you a question that you were deer in headlights, but you handled it okay. You asked them questions, and you're feeling really pumped and really excited about the interview and how it went, and you're really excited at the possibility of this job. So you go home. The first thing that most people do, as soon as they get into their car or on the bus or the train or whatever, they go, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't say that. I don't know if you guys do that, but that's what I tend to do. Immediately after an interview, you think, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. So resist the urge to do that first. What I recommend people do when they're done with their interview, go in their car or whatever, grab a notebook and write down what are the 2 things that you did really awesome. And then when it comes to your brain, the thing that you really sucked on, write it down that you wish you would have done differently. Make sure to write it down. So your next interview that you're invited on, you can remember not to do that again. Okay, so right after your interview, do that. And then next, within 6 hours of your interview, it's good practice to send a thank you note to every single person who interviewed you. So that's also where getting their interviewers' names beforehand can be really useful. Also, it's completely appropriate at the end of your interview to ask to get their business cards of the people who interviewed you. It makes writing a thank you note that much easier. Okay? So there's actually an example of a thank you note here on the back that I put, but I also have it up here. Yes? That is a debate in the career community, actually. Do you do a handwritten or an email? You should see the posts about it online, the feeds. So some folks say that they love getting a handwritten note. Some recruiters say, I'm making a decision that night, and so I'm not going to have time to write a that's not going to factor in my decision making then. So what I tend to tell people to do is to write an email within 6 hours of your interview. And then if you are like super pumped about this job, feel free to write a handwritten note. And it'll get to them in a few days. And then if they've already offered you the position, they can feel real good about offering you the position because look at what a good communicator you are. Okay? Yes?
Do you ever have to worry about being looking too eager?
It would be too eager if you wrote an email, sent a card, sent a fax, and also phone called. Like that would be a little too much. But just a really brief email and then a brief note. You don't have to go into like, I'm really great because I do this and this and this and this and this. No, just say it was so wonderful to meet with you. I'm even more excited. Yeah, just something like this, nice and short and sweet. But it shows that you're a good communicator then. Okay, so let's say you sent your thank you note and you even emailed it and then you sent a card because you're awesome. But then 2 weeks pass by and you still haven't heard anything. Sometimes in organizations this happens. A lot of times it doesn't, but sometimes it does. It is professionally appropriate to then call the HR department of the company that you interviewed with and ask them where they are in the application process for the position that you interviewed for. Because then they can say, oh, we hired someone and they're starting tomorrow, and you'll be like, shoot, that's not me. Or they can say, we're just finishing up meeting with all the candidates, and we should know soon, or something like that. Don't even mention your name, just that you want to know where they are in the application process. Okay? So it gives you a good idea of kind of where you stand. But at least give them 2 weeks. Any questions about follow-ups after an interview? Yes?
What would be a good subject title for the teacher?
Thank you. Just thank you. Yep. Any other questions about follow-up? Okay. So last but not least, I work with a lot of graduate students, and they come to my office. A lot of them are feeling really downtrodden and kind of like this, that academia has done this to them. And I want to let you know that there are so many employers out there that are really interested in you. You guys are like gold, I swear to God. What you've gained in your master's degree or in your PhD have really prepared you for a myriad of different options. Yes, during your master's degree and during your PhD, you zoned in usually on one topic of study, but by zoning in, you gained so many skills by doing that. And those are the skills that a lot of employers are looking for. So please don't sell yourself short. Apply for positions. A rule of thumb is if you meet 40% of the qualifications for a position, apply for that position. Because when they write position descriptions, they're writing like the ideal pie in the sky, gosh, it'd be great if we could get this person. But maybe you're the closest. And so you get in for an interview. So do not sell yourself short. You're awesome. You've learned a lot of different things here at the university. And good luck. Thank you, everybody.